The people that we're having a problem with come from two different groups. And understand there is an intentional and malicious infiltration of the church for the purpose of destroying her from within. This is what you need to understand. When I was in the seminary, it was one of the worst seminaries in the nation. In 1983 is when our seminary was at its absolute worst. I started there in '85. It was getting slightly better. But these people were so arrogant. I should point out, when I was in the seminary, if you were not homosexual or radical feminist, you were in big trouble. One of the professors actually was arrogant enough to stand up in front of the class and say, Martin Luther had the right idea, but he did it the wrong way. He left the church. You can't change the church from the outside, you can only change it from the inside, so we're not leaving. So these are people with an agenda. And what are the two groups? The two groups are, number one, a group of predatory homosexuals. They started their infiltration of the church in 1924. If you want to look it up, there is a book called The Homosexual Network written in 1982. So this is 20 years before all of this stuff hit. A man named Enrique Rueda looked at all of this, studied all of their own publications. They were publishing every year the number of seminarians, priests, and bishops they had. He traced it back to when they started. It began in 1924. And then 5 years later, in 1929, the communists began their infiltration of the priesthood. And the two groups did exactly the same thing. If you want to read about the communist one, there's a woman by the name of Bella Dodd, who was a deep-seated communist who got out of communism and converted to the faith. She testified before Congress in 1953, and in that testimony she said that we got the instructions from the Kremlin in 1929 as to what we were to do, and she said we were to take the best and the brightest, the guys who were smart enough to live a double life, good-looking guys who were sociable so that they would be noticed by their bishops and they would get promoted. They would become vocation directors, they would become bishops, they would become rectors of seminaries, they would have influential positions. And she said, we were successful beyond our wildest imagination. She said, I am personally responsible for more than 1,200 seminarians, priests, and bishops. And in 1953, mind you, again, now they started in 29, in 1953, she said, we already have 4 cardinals in the Vatican. That was 1953. It's way worse today. So we have these two groups. If you want to read about her, she wrote a book called School of Darkness. That was published in 1954. You want to understand why all of the promotion, the propaganda, the agenda, you can go back and read another book. It was written in 1932 by a man named William Foster. William Foster ran for the President of the United States in 1924, 1928, and 1932 for the Communist Party USA. In 1932, he wrote a book called Toward Soviet America. And in that book, he said, we aren't being able to get to the Americans because of 3 things: their morality, their family, and their patriotism. And he said, so the way that we are going to attack these 3 things is through homosexuality and radical feminism. They have been extraordinarily successful. So, what are we dealing with? We're dealing with a group of predatory homosexuals who became priests not to serve the church, but to destroy her from within. And as sad as this is, we need to recognize that it is actually something very good. It is the purification of the church, and that is going to lead ultimately to her crucifixion. Not many are going to remain faithful, unfortunately, But when we look at it and say, well, if this is what's going on in the church, what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to look at Jesus and say exactly what St. Peter said, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. Jesus founded one church, and that one church is the only institution in the world for the salvation of souls. It was founded for that purpose, and it will remain till the end of the world for that purpose.